Donald Trump and the far right have taken a real interest in the South Side of Chicago lately. They typically highlight issues of violence, poverty, and crime, really to push Trump's law and order policies. But in Trump's second term, these narratives have been taken a step further. And now the right is using these very real problems to justify their crackdown on immigration, stoking divisions between poor and working communities, using Black Chicago as a pawn in its game. So what's the reality on the ground here in Chicago? And what's really behind the tension between the city's immigrant and Black communities? Let's get to the root.
Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country.
Those that are in power benefit from our division.
We're all fighting for the same thing.
But all of a sudden you see 10 buses, 20 buses parking on Federal Plaza. They start picking one population against the other one.
Yeah, Black Chicago has really been a stronghold of political power and cultural vibrancy ever since the Great Migration, when millions of people fled the Jim Crow South seeking better jobs and better treatment. But the racism followed them. I mean, they had to deal with redlining, job discrimination, segregation, and mob violence. I mean, there was a race riot in 1919 that saw 23 Black people and 15 white people die, and I believe about 500 people injured, most of them Black. And Black Chicago has, been home to many luminaries like the poet Gwendolyn Brooks, Mahalia Jackson, the gospel music standard bearer, blues legend Muddy Waters, who came up here from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and of course, Black Panther Party leader Fred Hampton. But despite these contributions, the city is still grappling with these inequities that at this point seem a part of its DNA. To see an example of racism in the city, we headed to Cabrini Green on the city's near north side to talk to J.R. Fleming, a Chicago native and anti-eviction organizer.
So when we talk about communities being pitted against each other, we're talking about like the migrant community and the African-American community, right? Mm-hmm. We're standing in the community right now, Cabrini Green, where so many promises was made, for the rebuild, and that hasn't happened. And the storyline behind why it hasn't happened has been there is not enough resources. There is not enough funding. And then years later, you have an influx of migrants, right, coming to Chicago, and then resources appear out of nowhere.
I wanted to ask if you could also explain, since we've been talking about housing, sort of why this area of Cabrini Green is fenced off, and you mentioned it has been for 12 years.
Well, they were supposed to redevelop this, right? They're not economically motivated to redevelop this. And again, Democrats' commitments, right, and promises, broken promises every time. I hear Democrats hear broken promises every time because of places like this, Cabrini Green. You closed this for 12 years. You could have fixed this up and used this as a housing base, right? Just a little of the resources we invested in the migrants, right? 10% of that could have fixed this up. And we could have been housing citizens of Chicago as well as the migrants. You don't have to do either or, you could have done both, and versus or. And we chose not to do that. And the reason why is the skyline behind us. It's evident why they're not in a rush to fix this up. This is some of the most valuable piece of land in all of America, not just Chicago, in all of America, with a close proximity to a lakefront, the downtown metropolitan area, and universities, right? This, what you get per square foot is ridiculous.
Chicago native and local business owner Xavier Ramey tells us that the frustration of Chicago's Black community stems from years of dealing with broken promise after broken promise.
For the last century, 2 centuries, it's a lot of Black people fighting for the social conscience of America. And when you look at the conditions of Black people today, they don't see the fruit of all that work. And then we are asked, how about you partner and help somebody else? And I think a lot of African Americans, especially in Chicago, because Chicago has a lot of Black folks, they bristle because they're asking this question, when will we not get everything? When will we get stability? When will we get what America said is for everyone? When? And how much energy do we spend fighting for all when we can't even serve and provide for ourselves?
On the south and west sides of the city, where most Black residents live, poverty can reach and even exceed 50%, far outpacing their white counterparts. A report from DePaul University's Institute for Housing Studies found that in 2021, Chicago was already 120,000 affordable units short for low-income households. And this is before Texas Governor Greg Abbott sent a single bus of migrants to the city. Feelings of inequity can run deep in Black Chicago because of these conditions, with this frustration fueling narratives that migrants are handed a cushy lifestyle when they cross the border. The reality, however, isn't so cut and dry. Julia de Jesus Alejandre, a native of Chicago's Northwest Side and executive director of Palenque Logan Square Neighborhood Association, says the situation facing Latinos in Chicago really isn't all that different.
Yeah, well, first, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. If you're in a Black or Latino community in Chicago, most likely you are also poor or working class, right? And you're far away from resources. So that's Chicago, right? And that's by design. So like social engineers, the banking industry, the realtors designed redlining, right? And created maps entirely of our city that actually hold true today. Wow. So in 1934, when they're creating these maps, or 1943, or they're creating these maps and they're like, this is a Mexican community and this is a Black community. And those communities are still Black, Mexican, Polish, like still to this day. That's wild to me, right? That hasn't changed. I also want to complicate the Black and brown divide narrative in that it was also brown and brown, right? Like the long-term undocumented feeling really left behind. Most of our leaders are long-term undocumented, right? So they've been here for 20, 30 years. No work permits, right? No guarantees. No health insurance for years, right? Haven't qualified for any subsidies for housing, nothing, right? And some of them were helping Venezuelans fill out work permits applications. That hurts, right? It hurt them.
Under Texas Governor Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star, Texas began busing migrants to Democrat-run cities, with Chicago receiving its first bus in August of 2022. By January 2025, the city had spent $600 million on shelter and aid for migrants. Throughout its history, Chicago has seen waves of immigrants from Mexico, Poland, Puerto Rico, Italy, and other countries. There are about 1.7 million immigrants in the Chicago metro area, comprising roughly 18% of the population. And despite rumors of lazy immigrants leeching off of federal assistance, they also contribute about $7 billion in combined state and local taxes. Mexican-born longtime Chicago labor organizer Jorge Muhika explains that the strategy of pitting immigrants against more established communities is as old as the city itself.
Well, I think it's very intentional, divide and conquer. It's not a new story. There's been divisions between immigrants and native populations forever. Mexican immigrants started arriving here by being imported from Mexico. The railroad lines started recruiting people in Mexico in 1900, 1905 for the railroads. And then they discovered that, well, these immigrants may be used for another thing, as strike breakers. Now, African American populations are absolutely right. They have been denied services and they have been denied resources for the longest time. Absolutely, that's not new. But also immigrants have been denied and keep being denied resources and allocations and access to services, etc., etc. It's the same kind of population, it's the same denial to both of them, but the ideology in the mainstream media is that they each other are the enemy. And we lost that battle because we can't afford, to be in the big mainstream media saying the contrary. So we use our resources, but the feeling is there, absolutely. Immigrants feel envious of African American populations in the sense that, they are citizens, they are entitled to this and this and that, while I am not, but I work harder than them. And then from the other side, you see, I've been denied all these services and all these benefits for all my life, and all of a sudden I see the government giving immigrants these benefits. And that is so plentiful of small, very little details that never made it to the media, that never make it to the media. You know, the why some immigrants are given benefits, why some or the fact that most immigrants are not being given any kind of benefits at all. They don't have access to those benefits under the law, but they pay taxes, and everybody benefits of the taxes immigrant, undocumented immigrants pay. But that's too detailed to be put forward, you know, in a massive way. It's education. It takes an immense amount of education.
Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration is a core plank of his agenda, carrying out a shock and awe campaign of raids, detentions, and expulsions, while at the same time cutting health, education, and job programs that directly benefit Black workers. He's removed protections against systemic racism and empowers institutions like the police while attacking the very notion of Black history as DEI. Kay Sanders, an organizer with Healthy Hood Chicago, addressed Trump's use of racist stereotypes of Chicago. I'm curious, as an organizer, what do you think is really at the root of a lot of these tensions?
Oh, the media, of course. They, even living in Chicago and the name that everybody says, Chirac, I go to other places, I visit other states, and people think that you walk outside, you're getting shot at. You can't walk downtown, you can't walk out of your house, you can't walk. Anyway, they make it seem like there's a war zone everywhere. Like they make it seem like there's no love in Chicago at all. And I feel like in the media, they just build it and build it and build it. So if they did that with just a name and making it seem like everything's just so bad here, there's no love, there's no care here, it's the same thing with this. Like they're taking maybe a small, minute population who may feel like, okay, I've lived here, I've lived in Chicago my whole life, and I live out west, and there's never been any resources coming here. There's no programs coming here. There's nobody doing this. And now the migrants are coming in, and they're getting all of this help. And what about us? So we've had these conversations. We've heard the people, and to under-invested person, I could see that. I could see why you would feel that way. But when you really start to do the education and see the programs and organizations who are out here doing the work, you will realize that that's not true. We're all fighting for the same thing. We're all looking for the same resources.
Though the arrival of migrants to the South Side and other parts of Black Chicago have caused separation, there are people in the city who are working to heal the division. Reverend Phelps opened his church to the new arrivals, providing food, clothes, and eventually bilingual church services. Though Phelps saw this as an act of faith, he was surprised that others were not on board.
And I'm curious, were there people that had an issue with the fact that you opened up your church to migrants in this way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So initially, Sean, I was calling Uncle Tomas. Yeah. First day when we first opened our church, there were people that protested us. There were African American leadership that literally came and protested. We also had members actually that left the church as a result of that. For me, if I see someone's naked, I don't think we need to have a church meeting to determine whether or not you're gonna clothe them. Right. If I see somebody's hungry, I don't think I need to have a church meeting to talk about feeding them. Our biblical mandate is already there. So what I just kept doing was just preaching and teaching and serving and leading by example and providing opportunities. And so what we discovered that what I call the law of proximity or the ministry of proximity, and that is the closer we are, right, the more alike we see, right? And it's really hard for me to hate you up close. I feel as a faith leader, it's my responsibility to provide a platform and or a safe space for us to explore those connections.
Chicago is a place brimming with strong conviction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are far apart. And for every example of division, we found a desire for unity and a recognition that this is a time to stand together.
We the people, it's our responsibility to make this world a better place for the next generation to inherit. It's we the people responsibility to hold the Republican administration, the Democratic administration, the local administrations, and the federal administration accountable to the needs of the people, not just the needs of corporations.
Sometimes we get so stuck in survival mode because, capitalism and where we live and all of these things that are holding us here, you forget that the person in front of you, the person next to you is human. They also have these experiences. They also are experiencing the same exact thing that you're doing. So the only way to change that is if we build relationships.
Well, I would say that every major country that has had a revolution, in history, has done it because they united the majority of people. You don't have to unite everybody, you just need to unite the majority of people, and then you can do fantastic things.
We've been here in Chicago trying to get to the bottom of what is driving the tension between this city's immigrant and Black communities. And the crux of the issue seems to be one of unequal distribution of resources, Black residents feeling like their interests have been overlooked. And we happened upon this mural, which I think really speaks to what we've been reporting on. Because here we have this figure, almost like a Virgin Mary type figure, with a Mexican flag on one side and a red, black, and green Black liberation flag on the other. And at the top here, you'll notice there's a black hand and a brown hand stretching forth, and coming down from them are not chains, but broken chains. Because the same officials, the same economic and political systems and institutions that deny Chicago's Black residents things like affordable housing, living wages, all of these sorts of things. These are the same people and the same institutions that are denying immigrants a path to citizenship, that is carrying out a brutal crackdown on immigration in general. And so although our struggles may look different, that by coming together, understanding a oneness of purpose, and by striking out at the real culprit is how we break the chains that bind us.